paid, earned, shared, and owned. And PR sort of, covers each of those. These generative AI models that literally everybody uses today are prioritizing PR over everything else.
With me today, I have Don McLean. He's the CEO of McLean Media, an award-winning PR and marketing content expert. And of course, today we will talk a lot more about PR and some of the misconceptions, some of the stuff you gotta know, and how we can use this in today's time, because PR is all this time, and I think it's valuable to know how to properly use it. And there's a lot of new stuff happening with it right now. Don, how are you feeling today?
Doing great, Zipko. Thanks for having me. Yeah, very excited to be here.
Fantastic. Now, let's start with the most important question that people might have. What is PR?
That's a great question. I mean, PR is so many things, right? But it's basically how you communicate to your audience, So whether that's personal PR, like if you're a single executive that or you're trying to do your startup, that's something that you could focus on, or it could be, corporate PR overall, and thinking about how you communicate to your audiences. There's a lot to PR. One of the great ways to explain it is looking at a model called the PESO model. So this is specifically more in terms of media relations, but also content building. So PESO stands for like paid, earned, shared, and owned. So there's different properties for all of those things. And PR sort of, covers each of those.
When we're looking at the first thing that you said was how you communicate with your audience.
Exactly.
Is there this kind of negative connotation when it comes to PR, where people are related to spin?
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe earlier versions of PR, that's definitely has been a problem in the past. There's a huge ethical side of the PR realm though. And so anybody that has studied PR in the last, I don't know, I mean, ever since I've been doing PR anyway, something happens with, perfect example, right? The of that astronomy company, right? And where he was at the Coldplay concert with his head of HR. I think that's a great example of crisis communications and thinking about, if you were in that situation, how would you communicate? What would you do? What would the plan be there? Situations like that happen surprisingly more often than you'd expect. Maybe not as publicly, but they definitely happen. And making sure you have a good playbook is extremely important, because you don't want to spin something or share something that maybe is untrue. You can share that we're looking further into this, and have those communications that set up a specific timeline of, when you're going to follow up with your audiences and whatnot. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question a bit.
It does, because you're saying like the best thing you can do in those situations is trying to communicate that you're looking into this. Don't put out false information. Have a time limit
Exactly.
when you can get back to people and what they expect at what time.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any truth to when you hear someone saying, we'll talk about this in 3 weeks, that they do that deliberately because 3 week is the regular cycle of a news story, and they're trying to kind of push it to say, we'll talk in 3 weeks, at a time where it's not important anymore?
Oh my goodness. I'll tell you what, that if a situation like that came up with any of my clients and it was, we'll talk about it in 3 weeks, I would be fired. Yeah, that would be beyond the news cycle for sure. I mean, unless it's something like a major court case or something else like that. And of course, for any of those things, definitely work with lawyers. I mean, don't take my advice as gold here, but you definitely want to have communications for the day of. I mean, that's why for somebody that's so public like that, for companies in that realm, you do want to have a communications plan sort of set up beforehand, so that okay, in these types of situations, what would I do? What would the timeline look like? And how would I approach that? And who needs to be involved? Because a lot of meetings have to be set up right away. A lot of communications have to be drafted. You want to have like a holding statement, but the holding statement only lasts so long, right? So you want to be part of that story, not necessarily just watch it unfold. So yeah, and I mean, this is one of the reasons why I sort of shy away from crisis communications, because the people that are experts in it are really experts. For me, I know that I can do it. I know that I can write those communications, but it's a different animal entirely. So
and that's where I wanted to kind of start with that point, because PR is usually kind of spinning a story. That's what people kind of say, oh, that's just a bunch of PR, where in reality it's not that all. Like, there are so many aspects to this. So for example, let's start with another myth. Media relations and PR are the same.
Media relations is a portion of PR, and I love media relations. Media relations is one of my favorites. When I was at a previous agency, they used to call me the fixer, because if account couldn't get coverage, they would say, okay, let's put Don on it for a couple weeks. And I'm not trying to pat myself on my back, though it probably sounds like it now. But it was because I always looked for different ways to tell stories to individual reporters. So a lot of people for media relations sort of do a spray and pray approach, which means they'll send it out to as many media as possible and hope that they hear back. And the communications are the same, the follow-ups are the same. What people fail to realize sometimes when you're pitching is that those people are just like you and me on the other side. Journalists are humans that have lives that can only prioritize a certain amount of stories. And especially, in today's day and age, I think it's something like there's 8 PR people for every 1 journalist or something like that. And the amount of journalists is still shrinking. It's the industry is tightening up, different publications are closing. So you need to be very specific in your media outreach. What's the reason why that reporter would want to cover your news? And what can you offer them that's different? I do spend a good amount of time working with different clients to see, okay, is there a metric that we might be able to pull from your internal data that would be really interesting to give as an exclusive to tie in with this story? Something like that. Sometimes that can be difficult. Sometimes companies just don't want to share that information, and I get it. There's a lot of reasons why you might not want to share specific internal data, but I find that internal data supports journalists the most. So I do try to push for that sometimes. And in terms of media relations too, I mean, one of the things that I've seen change a lot over the years is, it's harder to pick up the phone and call a journalist. There's for like television stations, it's a little bit easier because that you can call the news desk. That if you get the reporter's information because they're coming on site somewhere, that okay, you can text them or call them. Of course, you don't want to overuse that, but that's the sort of calling a journalist all of the time is not as relevant today. When I was starting out in PR, it was, you can't be afraid to pick up the phone, and I would do that. I would do emails, I would follow up with phone calls, I'd do follow-up emails. You'd have multiple forms, and now it's really just email and social media in terms of media outreach, which, reaching out on social is a whole different animal as well. You don't want to alienate the journalists. You want to make sure that, you know what they're covering, what they're interested in, that sort of thing, because they'll definitely call you out for it. I've seen some interesting posts recently because, people just don't know the coverage and they're using that spray and pray approach, and whatever output they get from, their email systems, they're just sending it on. And a journalist will, if they're in the automotive space, for example, they're not going to, cover this non-automotive story that they've been pitched, and they might post that on their LinkedIn or post that on their, X feed or wherever they're posting nowadays, and share that. And I've definitely seen some people with their tail between their legs. So yeah.
It sounds like you're saying that we have to be with purpose, meaningful when you're reaching out to a journalist, because it is a person, is not a computer receiving your pitch. You want to have,
Absolutely,
like, you're thinking it's a person, like they need to do a job, they have to cover stories, they have to have good stories to cover, and it has to be within what they are covering, what they're good at, and what their focus is. And
absolutely.
when we're talking about media relations and PR, not the same. We're trying to kind of show that there is more to this whole thing than just like media or just spin or just kind of damage control. So if someone is, they're a company, they're like, look, we need to shape the public opinion of our company, or we want to change an aspect or something like that. Let's start with a good one. So how do you develop a good PR strategy? What are the pieces that you have to develop a good PR strategy?
Yeah, I want to go back to the PESO model for a second. So that paid, earned, shared, and owned, right? We need to look at the whole, the whole gamut of what we're going to do, right? And we need to understand the goals of the company. I always start there. So from a strategic perspective, we don't want to just start, engaging in one tactic or another tactic. We want to make sure that, okay, what's that overall goal of the company, and how can we, use, these different elements of PR to build up a great story throughout the year, right? So, and media relations will almost always be part of it. Again, my favorite part of PR is media relations, but, content marketing, it uses the word marketing, right? But it does fall under PR, really. A lot of people might argue with me about that. They might say, "Oh no, that's just for a marketing firm," and that's why I say I do PR and content marketing, because I want to make sure that people understand that there's more to this overall process. So, one of your owned channels might be the company blog, for instance. So, what communications are you putting there? Are you putting letters from the CEO? Do you have specific, like I work with a lot of life science companies, right? And so they might have certain ways of, talking with the FDA to help move a drug approval forward, or they might, have a better way to do clinical data management in clinical trials. We would make sure that we're telling those stories through either their blog or maybe some webinars. Again, these are all owned channels. So if that relates back to their, business strategy, then we can sort of connect that. The shared channels, those are more like the, social. So it's something that's for everyone, right? So I actually wrote this book called The In Crowd for LinkedIn Mastery, and it just came out in June and on Amazon, and hit #1 in its first week. So proud of it. But that's a great one. And I wrote it with a different path. So it's more focused on a public relations and thought leadership mindset to LinkedIn, and using that to increase brand awareness. So it could be for an individual or for a company. And, a lot of times, the CEO or the heads of departments play a very heavy role in the PR approach for this portion of the PESO model. I think it's extremely important. And there's a lot of research out there that shows people want to follow people, not just brands, right? So to have those experts, to have those scientific thought leaders, for instance, is extremely important. So I want to make sure that they're, again, talking through the blog. We have those shared channels. We have the earned channels, which is the media relations. So we're getting the right interviews, drafting the right press releases, offering the right exclusives, pitching in the right ways. I like to do a lot of pitches, what they call under embargo. So, maybe we have a big announcement coming, and say it's 2 weeks from now. I would go ahead and start reaching out to trusted journalists and offer them, some news that they could write in advance of the release date, and they would agree to hold it to the release date. And the thing that's so helpful about that is journalists, again, because of the ratios, right, and the new demands, they don't have a lot of time. They just don't, So a lot of times it's really appreciated when something comes in advance. They can look at it, they can think about it, they can maybe connect it to what they're currently doing, and then go forward in that way. And then the paid channels are more of the, obviously paid, right? So if there's certain placements, it could, a lot of times that falls under advertising, but, strategic PR will almost always include some sort of paid element to help with the lift, right? So it could be so many different things. I could go on forever, but there's a lot of great examples recently about how advertising and PR sort of connect in certain ways. Sometimes it's for shock value. I think that one of the best examples of sort of PR and advertising connecting together is Super Bowl ads. That's the biggest thing that you can sort of say is, say there's a celebrity cameo, right? People are going to start talking about that. News outlets are going to write about Ryan Reynolds being in the new whatever ad there is. So that's a form of PR. They know what they're doing by placing that celebrity or by doing this one thing to get people interested. We've seen before people posting a QR code just for the 30 seconds on the screen, right? That gets PR in itself because it's so drastically different from all of the other ads that, take millions of dollars to produce. So,
yes, I think from when it comes to Super Bowl and PR, it was controversial because Kanye West did that in his car or somewhere. It was like a 30 seconds. It was no editing, was god awful, and he claimed to make like 7 or whatever million in selling on his store. And people were talking about the ad as the PR, not anything more than that. It was just a very different, very like to pay that many millions for that ad and then to have that to be the finished product airing, like you're saying, part of the PR.
Exactly. So it's what people traditionally think of as like more publicity, but still falls under PR, right? And I don't want to just talk about Super Bowl ads necessarily, because a lot of the companies I work with, they either have no PR or marketing people on staff, or they have one person on staff, so very few companies that I work with have full departments of marketing people right now. And I want to make sure that people understand it. PR is accessible for everyone, for every company, no matter what size they are. Just hope folks are realizing that.
Yes, I think the Super Bowl ad was an easy concept to kind of grasp. You're talking about the ad. It's not about the ad anymore. That's why it's part of the PR. And that's why we put paid in your whole the PESO approach. Now, if we're looking at, I'll touch upon one more thing and then we have another question. Press releases. People will just be like, PR, let's just do a press release, and we did PR. And they would, if you ask them like, do you do PR? They're like, yes, we do press releases, and we use a bunch of services, and we're just pushing these press releases. How do you feel when someone asks you, hey, can you do PR for me? I need some press releases.
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you that I still love writing a great press release, and I have a lot of thoughts on how to write a great press release, but I'm using that word great press release because there's a lot of bad ones out there. So it's in recent years people have said like, oh, PR is dead, press releases are dead, this is dead. Obviously some shock value there, but I would just like to add bad press releases are dead. That um, again, especially with the rise of Gen AI, I'm seeing a lot of people that are just sort of, putting into Chat GPT, write me a press release on X, and they're publishing it, and they're paying to have it sent over a wire. And there's a lot of good, news wires out there. Some of them might call you out on that. Some of them have really high editorial standards. Some of them will publish basically whatever you include. So it depends on, how much money you have to spend and that sort of thing. But making sure a press release tells the whole story and talks about, maybe some of your strategy behind it, I find is extremely helpful. And again, I love to include a metric if I possibly can, even leading with that, and making sure whatever story is sort of qualified, for a journalist to want to cover. Because some stories, they just don't hit that mark, right? It might be just because they want to increase sales or something like that. And totally fine. It's a valid point. You want to increase sales? Great. Let's do more PR. Let's talk about it. But maybe, maybe they're not thinking about it as clearly. So that's why I say, like, oh, is there some sort of trend that we can talk about that you're seeing? Or is there, again, I'm going back to the metric. Have you seen, a certain niche of this product growing, or, is your team growing in a certain area because of the demand? So I'm always trying to pull something else out to give it a little bit more lift. And that's really a key, I find. There was something else I was going to add, but I'm losing it right now. But yeah, I mean, also, like I said, in terms of PR, and pushing out these press releases, some of these sites now, they do want you to pay. And especially with, shrinking newsrooms and that sort of thing, I'm seeing a lot of outlets saying, okay, pay me X amount, we'll publish the press release. That's certainly not ideal. I started creating one of my own websites. It's called Boardroom Buzz. It's at boardroombuzz.com. And it basically is an outlet where I can, for startups that can't get coverage, I'm giving them guaranteed coverage on one of their press releases to make sure that they are getting some lift. And to transition a little bit, I think one of the things that I've heard recently, I'm actually writing an article on this right now, is these Gen AI models prefer press. They prefer press coverage over pretty much anything else. And I think part of it is because they've trained the models on the likes of these, large press outlets. So they're looking for, what's those third-party high-value sites to bring people solid information that, from an editorial standpoint, right? And they're prioritizing that over, company websites, over, social media posts, over almost everything else. So I think that is incredibly important. And it sort of gives a renewed spirit to public relations, which to me is super exciting, because I felt like, with all of the PR is dying, press releases are dead talk that was starting to creep in, it's like, okay, just as you thought we were going away, nope. Even the next generation, these generative AI models that literally everybody uses today, are prioritizing PR over everything else. And that just makes my heart happy.
When this is an interesting topic, because there's a couple of contradicting things. You did mention a couple of interesting things here.
Yeah.
The shrinking newsroom, generative AI prefers PRs, but the end users, we as the end users, we shrunk the newsroom because we stopped believing the newsroom that much, and we're leaning more towards podcasts or blogs or individuals somewhere on the internet. We kind of moved away from the Washington Post or the New Yorker or the Times, the Guardian, which we started to move away from those. They didn't pay for the subscriptions, and we shrunk the newsrooms. But then you have the private sector, all these companies wanting to get exposure with the journalists, and now we've seen that generative AI is preferring PRs, something that is validated, confirmed, read by a lot of people, edited by editor, perhaps. How do you find this? How do you find that balance in this place where the AI is not pulling really outdated stuff, where you do have connections with places that will still have a good lift when it comes to if that's a PR, like a press release, or if it's part of the whole strategy? How do you, as someone that works with these companies, that's the point I was trying to make, that you're working with these companies, you're like, look, I can find the balance where, yes, we can find the right journalists because the newsrooms are shrinking, we can still find ones, and the PR will be used by these AIs properly without picking up old data about your topic?
That is a great question, and it's a very in-depth question, and that for one, that's going to take a lot of thought, and I might not be able to give you all of that answer today. However, the shrinking newsrooms it's interesting because news still plays such a big factor in what we're doing. I mean, and I'm seeing teams do better with things, frankly. TikTok, for instance, all of the major news outlets are on TikTok, and they are trying to bring better stories to people, and stories that will stick with audiences that are on TikTok, and that took a minute. It took a little time for them to really realize that, oh, I need to have a full-time person dedicated to producing this material for more audiences to see. So what I'm trying to say is that some of the avenues are changing a bit, right? But it still matters what the content is of the story to hit those news outlets in the right way. So there's certain publications that will never go away. 500 years from now, the New York Times is still going to be producing the best content in the world. I can guarantee that, and I hope that somebody 500 years from now listens to this and says, Don was right. But there's so many good publications out there that have figured out a way to change with the times. One of the companies that I work with is called Hemmings, and they're the world's largest collector car marketplace. They've been around for over 70 years now, since 1954, and they've done a really great job of being innovative. So Hemmings was known for having these classic car listings, and they have this really thick magazine that they send out monthly, which they still do, and they've sent out monthly since 1954. I think, for a lot of these car publications that have sort of gone away, reduced print, maybe done just quarterlies or ceased operations altogether and just went online or even not online, they have really figured it out. They're doing auctions now, and they have this Hemmings Motor Club, and they have all of these different exciting things that bring the community together. So they've really found and leaned into their niche more. And so I think more outlets sort of need to do that. On the other side, it's again, that story value, right? And I want to mention a little bit too, it's not just the Gen AI models, but it's also looking at search engine optimization. I think a lot of people forget about, when they write a great press release, what needs to go into that to be searchable, right? Because the Gen AI models are still going to look at what some of that text is within, and it's going to need to hit in a certain way. So I still use the concepts of search engine optimization when I draft a great press release, or any great pitch or piece of news. And I have another great example. So one of the companies that I've helped launch recently is called MySalt AI, and they're a personal AI social network, and they're looking to take on some of the biggest in the space. They launched just out of Detroit here, and the whole rise of personal AI and everybody having their own individual AI is starting to pop. And hopefully in the next year, that'll actually become a reality, and people will actually have their own personal AI. I mean, it's a reality now with MySalt AI, but some people are still. It's going to take a while for people to get on board, right? But where you can actually name your own AI that's assigned to you. And so when we've done the press releases with them, and getting ready to push out another big announcement in the next couple of weeks here, it's focused on what are those pieces that people might be searching for to find similar things, and focusing in on those personal AIs, or they have a new announcement soon that's gonna even go bigger than that. We want to make sure that those are in there, and so those generative AI models are picking it up. And yeah, sometimes stories might hit really well, and you'll get on a nice TV interview, or you'll get something big, maybe in the Wall Street Journal or something like that. Again, that's not accessible for everyone necessarily, so it's looking at what are some of those other high value sites as well, and making sure that we can get the stories in there still with the right search terms to be able to show up.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
We're going in a more kind of tangible direction, I would say, where we're talking about specifically the stuff that you are doing right now with some of the clients and the startups, and especially in the AI space. You showed us the book. You wrote a book about PR and how to approach LinkedIn. Let's look at that a little bit more, because we talked about what some people might say legacy media. Okay, this is old school stuff, man. You're reaching out to journalists. Let's bring it to something real that some people are already doing. Like you said, content creation is part of PR, and you have a whole book about PR on LinkedIn. How would a founder, a CEO, what are the first advices you would give them to properly do PR on LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I have 250 pages on it. It's like 48,000 words, something like that. And it's I think the number one thing is for them to realize that LinkedIn needs to be prioritized. You mentioned legacy. I think that's really important to think about. Not everybody necessarily cares about that. That's okay. One of the things that people have focused on for LinkedIn, and I'll ask, I give a lot of talks. I was just in Ireland, and I was speaking to this international education conference. I was in Pittsburgh speaking to the National Association of Government Communicators for their communications school. And I asked them to raise their hand. I said, how many people fire up LinkedIn when they're looking for a job? And that's it. And 70% of the room raises their hand. That is it. That is, they're hurting their careers is what they're doing by doing that. The point of LinkedIn is not to just, pat yourself on the back the whole time and, talk about all the great stuff you're doing. The point of LinkedIn is to think about the expanse of your career and use LinkedIn as the catalyst. So you can, again, talking about that strategy, like we talked about before, going back to that, we need to understand our personal strategy and how does that fit in with our business strategy now and our business strategy 10 years from now, or by the time we get to the end of our career. It might not be perfectly laid out, but I think, a lot of people can, I love using these 3x5 or these sticky notes, right? You can just write down your goals on these sticky notes, the things that you want people to understand from you, the goals that you have for the future, the things that are important to you in your industry. And you can start setting them out and categorizing them. And again, when you prioritize LinkedIn, you might just start by, passively scrolling. You might just start by congratulating people on a new job they got, something like that. But when you really start to fully embrace it, you'll start with that content creation. So all of those sticky notes that you have, you can take them and put them into, I like to put them into 3 buckets, or what I call pillars. And so you can balance your content in a way that you're not only on the pillar that, again, is talking about your progress. You might be able to talk about industry trends, or you might have certain processes and ways of doing business that are different than others that make you a little bit more interesting, right? And then you might have, I don't know, there's an infinite amount of pillars, and it's different for everybody, but they somehow always fit into 3 for me. They always fit into 3 categories, and I love the power of 3. But once you start seeing that balance, you can realize that, okay, people might not know that there's, specific pillars. Those aren't necessarily public for people to see, but they'll realize that, oh, I see the whole person here. I'm hearing a story about something that their kids said that reset their mind that day, or they had this case study, and this client was struggling with something, and here's how they thought differently about it to give them the right path forward. And so again, these things help that balance and makes you get excited for LinkedIn. And you don't have to post every day. A lot of people say that, I do say you should be in there almost every day, especially if you really are caring about your career, especially if you're a thought leader, especially if you're a head of a company. And there's so many other tactics and things that you can do to go back to your strategy. But the last thing I'll say is that the messaging is where the deals can really happen. We messaged each other on LinkedIn, for instance, and I'm here on this great podcast and talking to your audience. That's really valuable for a lot of my clients. They want to be on podcasts like this. For people that can't afford PR, that's an easy thing that they can do. They can look up people that host podcasts in their space on LinkedIn and message them. And maybe that will lead to a relationship that can be built. Also, it's great because there's so many people there. Whatever company you want to work with, you can follow them. You are free to comment on anybody's post that you want to post, comment on. So if there's a VP of research and development at a major company and you want to be part of that, you should start commenting on their stuff. You should put the bell on their page, click that so you're notified, and every time they post, you'll see it, and then you can leave a comment on there. That's part of the commenting strategy that I talk about in the book. So there's a lot to it, and it's endless, and it's not, if it's not just because LinkedIn doesn't pay me or anything like that. LinkedIn is a catalyst for my business goals. So that's really what I want people to understand.
When we're looking at LinkedIn as a catalyst toward the business goals, putting all these strategies together, a lot of people do use it for outreach. How would you combine PR with your outreach efforts?
Outreach in terms of media or in terms of sales?
In terms of sales.
Yeah. You obviously want to put out great content. You want to have a profile that is so strong that people can't ignore you. So I like to focus on how we can overhaul somebody's profile first to make sure it's, again, as strong as possible. And there are so many elements to it, and a lot of the presentations I give really just walk people through those steps to help them realize, like, what are all the things that they can be doing. They need to focus on that first. And there's a lot of areas on LinkedIn that you don't realize could be filled out. A lot of people will fill out a profile and they'll just do like there's a basic side that where you can just, experience, your about section, where you went to school, you're sort of done. But there is like a I forget the exact terminology, but it's like a good, better, best for me, right? It's like the basic, the medium, and the advanced. And those sections can sort of help guide you to say, like, there's a section for publications, for instance. And if you can't put anything there, it's like, well, okay, maybe I could write a story for a publication and have that published in a certain area. So again, that's the PR side coming out, right? There's also a section for awards. So say you're 20 years in your career, you haven't won a specific award yet. A lot of people that you work with might have. They might have won a different award. So you can say, okay, now I want to target awards. I want to see like what what's in my industry, or maybe in business in general, or or maybe you realize like, oh yeah, hey, I was top sales guy in my company 2 years ago, and I forgot to put that in there, something like that. So I sort of use those holes in LinkedIn to say, okay, that can help guide my career journey a little bit, which I think is a nice different way to approach it. But then once that's all set, again, it really comes down to the messaging. So in terms of that, I'd like to say that you want to be as personable as possible, and some of the automation really fails people. So you see a lot of LinkedIn automation tactics. You'll notice if you follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me, I use Don F. McLean, kind of like Michael B. Jordan, everybody knows Don McLean as like American Pie, the singer from the 70s, right? And there's a surprisingly large amount of Don McLeans in the world. So to differentiate myself a little bit, I do Don F. McLean. But that also really helps me because there is a large amount of automation, and my first name on LinkedIn is Don space F period. So if people reach out to me and it's an automated message, it'll say, "Hi, Don F." And so I'll realize, okay, that's not a person that I would really want to pay attention to right now. I'll just, move past it. I use that tactic because it's easy for me to see right away, but there's a lot of automation recently that, people are, either following up too much, or they're saying things that might not be appropriate. And it feels spammy, right? So I think, why send 500 LinkedIn messages when you could send 10 really good ones and have the potential to close on them? I have a really good response rate on my LinkedIn messaging right now, and it's because when I do it, I pay attention and I think about the person. So that's really important to me. And I don't use LinkedIn a lot to pitch journalists, but what I will say is I use LinkedIn to show journalists, like, this is my CEO's profile of whatever company that I'm pitching, or this is what they've been up to, and it sort of gives them a picture and something to sort of look at. And you see that content, you'll see more about them, you'll get their bio, you'll see the awards they've won, the boards that they're on, how long they've been with the company, their exact title, all of the things that a journalist would like to reference. And when it's presented in a great way and it shows that they have a certain amount of a following, that adds lift as well. So
it's interesting because the strategy you use with your name on LinkedIn, there was a guy that this was like years ago, and now I have the same thing because of him. So I messaged him, we had a call, and he's like, "Hey, you're on the call because you don't use automations." I'm like, "How did you know that I don't use automations?" Because I don't believe that you should use it, because not just because of the messaging. That is the second component in my belief, where AI is not there at all yet, or right now. So that would the message itself is noticeable, but the other piece is LinkedIn and all these other platforms don't want to run automations. They put all these guardrails, two-step verifications. If you run it, they will send a message, "Hey, we've noticed too many profiles are being opened." Limitations to these are all guardrails there, because you don't see that on X, you don't see that on Instagram,
right?
On LinkedIn, yes, they don't want you to run automations. And what I did is So the guy said, like, yeah, you don't use automations. That's why we're here today. I'm like, how did you know? Like, I don't use automations. He's like, well, I put a dot in my name because automations can distinguish if it's like a abbreviation or if it's the middle name that I'm shortening or something. Oh, like, interesting. So now when you go on LinkedIn, you will see it says dot and then my name, dot Zivko Drodowski. So that if someone sends me a message and says dot Zivko, same idea. I know it's an automation because they can't distinguish. And I showed that to a person that I did a podcast, Priscilla, and then I went on the website, on her LinkedIn, she had the same thing, and it does work. People are getting creative with these, like leaving the spaces, like what you're doing, or putting a dot in a specific place, because it's not like you said, and I think you used the right word. You don't hate it, but you don't pay attention to it. Like there's no purpose here. I'm one of thousands that they're sending today. I'm not going to pay attention to that message. Therefore, you want to have like a really good message developed when you're doing your LinkedIn outreach, or if you're doing PR in LinkedIn, like you said, what you're including for the CEOs that you're working with.
Exactly. And you have to know your audience a bit too, right? You can't, you don't want to be too informal to a scientific community. You don't want to be, too playful to a more formal or conservative, type of network. You have to be careful on that. There is a way to write things that can be have more mass appeal, that seem more personal, but you have to spend a lot of time understanding that target audience, and you have to be really deep in it to give it its due. A lot of people, I think, just go a little too quick with it. So I'm not saying that it's totally bad, but I just think the approaches right now are tough. But with that said, I mean, anybody that requests me on LinkedIn, I accept it. So even if it is somebody that's using automation, I still accept. I think there's a reason why they reached out to me. There is, whether it's an industry connection or whether it's somebody that can, find value in what I'm doing, and it helps build your audience too. So I think, there's some people that have an absolute no. I only connect with people on LinkedIn that I know personally. That's fine too. That's a personal choice. For me, I use it for also that networking function, to learn about people and to connect and have some conversations. So
yes, I think if you're expanding your network on LinkedIn, I always tell people expand it with the people you work with. I don't have a strong attachment to everyone on LinkedIn. I know them, and I've heard that before from a lot of clients. I'm like, great.
Yeah.
Is there anything good or bad about it? Not particularly, because maybe when I started Facebook 20 years ago, I knew everybody there, and then with time, it's fine. Some people you don't want to know, but you still have them there. So
they're still there after 20 years.
Yeah. And with LinkedIn, the way that I look at it is you have the opportunity to look at a person's aspect. Like you said, they're presenting themselves there for work, and I can reach out to people in a specific community or network I want to be. And I would encourage people to do that. Don't just do anybody for the sake of being connected, to show like I'm connected with XYZ. It doesn't really help you on LinkedIn. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
True.
It's who you're that networking effect is what LinkedIn is really good about. Now, if someone does want to do the networking event or the networking function with Don McLean, how do people get a hold of you? They hear the podcast, like, man, this guy's fantastic. I like the stuff that he's doing. How do people get a hold of you?
LinkedIn.com/in/Donald F. McLean is where you find me. You can also find me at McLeanMedia.com. So that's really exciting, and I hope to connect with more folks. Again, it's on Amazon, so if you look up the In Crowd for LinkedIn Mastery, you can see it there on Amazon. We have some really great reviews of the product up as well now, so you can see how it's benefiting some other people. And if you can't afford it, reach out to me. I'll send you the PDF, no problem.
Amazing. We'll put the link to the Amazon for the book, so if someone wants to grab it, they can find it easily.
Thank you.
But Don, I appreciate the time. Thank you for sharing all these things. I think people have a better understanding and appreciation of PR. It's not just about spins. There's a lot more stuff, especially the PESO method that you can use, and there is a lot of stuff that you can do with PR. It's more than just press releases. And at least for myself, I learned a lot of stuff. It's a whole thing that you can put together, especially how to use some of these things when it comes to LinkedIn, having a strong profile that can't be ignored. So appreciate the time and wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day. Appreciate you.